Good morning and welcome to a special double installment of the Avoid Vaping Fast Facts Webinar. Today, Kristen Holt, President and CEO of KDH will be leading our discussion around two topics. First, flavors and vapes, and second, tobacco industry tactics. So before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that if you missed our first 5 webinar installments, you can still access a full recording of them on our YouTube channel, KDH Research. I would also like to direct your attention to your viewing pane, where there's a section called Questions. If you have any questions as you are listening to the webinar that you would like me to ask Kristen at the end, please type them into that section. I will be moderating those questions when Kristen concludes both topics. And with that, Kristen, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Maria, and welcome everybody who's here to listen to our next installment of the Avoid Anti-Vaping Online Information Dissemination Webinar. Now we're going to segue quickly into the second half of our presentation today, which is on industry tactics and how the tobacco industry has really marketed vapes to youth and helped drive forward this epidemic of vaping rates. And the reason that flavors obviously relate very closely to this topic is that flavors is one of the largest industry tactics to make vaping and to make smoking more acceptable to kids. So I want to start this presentation by just drawing your attention to how the world of vaping has changed. So when vapes were first introduced to the market about 10 years ago, they were mostly produced overseas and they were sold here in the US by small to mid-sized independent companies. It was very much a small market driven, these products were sold mostly in vape shops, and it was a very much almost a small business driven product. That has changed really dramatically as big tobacco is increasingly invested in e-cigarettes as part of their product line. And you can see the ownership lines here. So Altria owns Philip Morris, who owns a 35% stake in Juul. L'Oreal owns Blue, which is another popular e-cigarette brand. British American Tobacco owns RJR Reynolds, who owns Vuse. And so now big tobacco is very much invested, literally, in marketing these products and making sure that there's a market for them. And with big tobacco comes big marketing and big lobbying budgets. So let's just talk about some of the industry tactics that are being used to promote vapes. And, I want to emphasize the fact that all of this is changing. This is a very, very fluid time in the policy world, in the prevention world when it comes to vape. There's so much attention on it right now related, that was spurred mostly by the increasing rates, but also by the deaths. And so the information I'm going to give you, I'll caveat where things are changing. So we already covered flavors, right? Flavors are a major way that kids are attracted into using this product. We just went over that, but I do want to mention that as one of the major tactics. I'll also mention specifically point of sale marketing. So I have a little assignment for you. If you're like me, you actually pay for your gas, usually at the pump. It's easier than going inside. But next time you need gas, just walk inside the convenience store and take a quick look around. And I think you'll be amazed at the number of products that are for sale, the marketing techniques that are being used to promote them within the store, where they're positioned, what size the signs are, and how prevalent tobacco and now vape advertising is within tobacco stores, or within convenience stores, excuse me. And this has always been a very substantial tactic that tobacco companies have used to promote their products to consumers. The advantage, and I'm using air quotes there, is that point of sale marketing hits everybody. And where there's prohibitions against marketing vapes directly to youth, point of sale occurs in the environment, and so it's very hard to make sure that youth don't receive it. It's a very effective way to get this message out to everybody, but youth in particular. So point of sale marketing is very lucrative for tobacco companies, and they use a lot of their resources on this. So point of sale marketing provides access to coveted markets. We know that 70% of youth shop at convenience stores once per week. So this is a way to reach youth and really circumvent some of the bans in reaching them more directly. There's a heavier density of convenience stores in low income minority neighborhoods. You can think about the literature on food deserts, so places where people have to get their groceries from convenience stores because there are no large big box stores. People may be in and out of convenience stores multiple times a day, and they're being exposed to this passive marketing every time they go in. Convenience stores are ubiquitous. There's 27 times more tobacco retailers than McDonald's in the United States and 28 times more than Starbucks. That's a lot of tobacco retailers. It's really everywhere. And we also know that it works. So 1/3 of teenage experimentation with smoking can be statistically linked with exposure to retail marketing. So that statistics relates specifically to combustible cigarettes, but it stands to reason and extrapolation that the prevalence of vapes and e-cigarettes in convenience stores using this same sort of point of sale marketing would have a similar effect on usage rates. So we know in 1971 that cigarette ads were banned on TV and radio, but there's no such bans on e-cigarette marketing, except that e-cigs are not supposed to market in youth-focused venues. So that means clearly they can't have e-cigarette ads on during the Saturday morning cartoons. But you will see if you look around that there's an awful lot of marketing just available in the open air. And here in Atlanta, Alto View just bought a very large slice of outdoor marketing billboards, and so there's multiple vape advertisements up on billboards on the routes that my kids take to school. So these advertisements really are in a lot of different places where kids are seeing them: outdoors, convenience stores, magazines, newspapers. So kids are seeing them. It's happening. We know that advertising for cigarettes was done a very particular way, and that there's a very similar path that e-cigarettes are following. They're using some pages out of an old book. And so these next few slides just really highlight for you the similarity between the way combustible cigarettes were marketed in the past, on the advertisement on the left, and more contemporary advertisements from recently for e-cigarettes. So you can see this rugged, rough, fresh air, rebel kind of theme running through the Marlboro Man, who was very popular in the 70s. And now that same trope is being used to advertise e-cigarettes. Similarly, you can see the parallels between the Newport ad on the left and the NJoy ad on the right. And again, even just this messaging around healthy, that it's safer, that was used in the 50s for combustibles is now being used for some e-cigarette brands. So these advertising approaches, not only where they're placing the advertising, but the themes that they use are things that are tried and true, worked for combustible cigarettes until there was stricter regulations placed upon them, and are certainly being reused and refreshed for advertising of vapes. Now here's some of the tricky stuff I just want to mention. And by tricky, I mean a little bit harder to manage, a little bit harder to moderate, less straightforward than advertising. So experiential marketing is a big investment of tobacco companies. And I just pulled out some examples to show. Blue in particular, which is an e-cigarette brand owned by L'Oreal, does a lot of sponsorships and experiential marketing. So earlier, a few years ago, they sponsored an IndyCar team that was branded with the blue cigarette logos. They've sponsored a variety of within events at music festivals in particular. Some of their music festivals, they have what are called this electric lounge, where people can be invited in to listen to particular music acts, but then they're also given free samples of products and pretty heavy marketing for Blue as the sponsor. Now it's important to note that the signage, the branding is all out at this music venue, and so everybody's seeing it. They do check ages theoretically at the door to make sure nobody underage is coming in. But again, this can be a very influential kind of environmental source of messaging on vapes. Similarly, Juul had a very heavy presence in social media, where people were championing Juul and being the voice of Juul on social media in this very naturalistic way. And a study was done that showed that Juul sales were highly correlated with Juul tweets. So sales went up as the number of tweets from Juul went up in a directional way. And there's been some crackdown on this. The FDA has scolded Juul for their use of social media as being too youth focused and therefore violating some of the regulations on that. But it is still happening. And so these messages about vapes, the point I'm making, are really everywhere, and they are being driven forward by big tobacco marketing budgets. Now, FDA enforcement. FDA has authority over these products and enforces the rules and regulations that are in place, and is in the process of expanding the rules and regulations about vaping in order to prevent youth use. And I thank Mike Lukovich, the cartoonist, for this awesome picture of what the FDA's job must be like. He didn't use it as that, but that's what I picture it, because every time they plug one hole, there's another hole that opens up, because there's just so much money to be made from vaping. So since 2016, the FDA has issued more than 8,000 e-cigarette warning letters to retailers online, in store, for how they're selling to youth and how they're handling sales to minors. And in September 2008 alone, there was more than 1,000 warning letters and 131 fines. So the FDA is really swimming upstream to try to regulate this very growing, very aggressive, and very lucrative industry. So what are the implications for prevention? In your communities, there's quite a few things that you can do, and many of you are likely already doing. So the first is advocacy, pushing for better laws, policy, regulations in your local area, in your state, things like flavor bans, increased regulation of marketing within convenience stores, making sure point of sale advertising is being done within the parameters set forward. So there's a large role that advocacy can play as prevention, but there's also things you can do with your youth and talk to them about where messages are coming from about vapes, what those messages are saying, and really trying to move the needle on awareness about the strategies that are being used to get their attention and what that could mean for their health. The more that we can point out to youth where they're getting messages and helping them being critical consumers of those messages can go a long way for helping them overcome them and make healthy choices. And then the third is to integrate environmental approaches into your prevention work. So understanding where are the convenience stores in your community, talking to those convenience stores and making sure that they're enforcing sales laws and age limits, that they're, that if there's stores close to schools, that there's a strong relationship between the school and the store, so that prevention message and that prevention pipeline is there. So understanding the environment in which your community is functioning and what really environmental barriers your youth have to overcome to get beyond the messages about the benefits and the good parts about vapes can really help go a long way to preventing their use. So that was a lot of information. I'm happy to take any questions that you guys might have.
Thanks, Kristen. We do have a couple of questions to start with. If anyone listening in has a question, please type it into that box that I mentioned earlier, and I'll be sure to relay it to Kristen. But to start with, the first question is, do e-cigarettes have the same packaging requirements in terms of warning labels as combustible cigarettes?
That's a great question. So right now, the only warning label that's required to be on e-cigarettes is that they contain nicotine and that nicotine is an addictive drug. That's the only requirement they have. I'm sure you remember from the history of cigarettes that the cigarette warning label that smoking may be hazardous to your health was a long time and a long fight coming. And there's actually been legislation pending and under appeal for years and years and years to get graphic warning labels put on cigarettes with more concrete health claims and graphic pictures. And this has been a very successful prevention approach in Europe and in other markets to have those graphic warning labels. That's been tied up in the courts in the US for many, many years. E-cigarettes do not have to have warning labels of the same caliber. The only disclaimer they have to put on them is that if they contain nicotine, that they do contain nicotine, which is addictive.
Great, thank you. And then the next question is, what would you say is the biggest challenge facing community-level vaping prevention efforts?
Yeah, it was interesting in putting together these slides to just think about all of the different sources of information about vaping that kids are being exposed to. So there's these messages in the environment, and they go into convenience stores, when they look through magazines, even when they're on social media, they're getting message after message after message about that these products are safe, they're fun, they're flavorful, they're cool. And, you know, the overt messages about their risks are really limited in comparison to the number of positive messages they're getting. And so teaching kids to be critical consumers of the messages they're getting so they understand the imbalance and have some real concrete knowledge about the risks of vaping and why avoiding them can help protect their health and their outcomes is it can be really an uphill battle, but it's important work, and it's important to keep those messages, those prevention messages, front and center in a community's mind, and from all sources. So from kind of the official sources of school and parents, but also from other trusted adults like coaches, mentors, so that the community and the adults are really giving one united message about the importance of avoiding vapes. I think that's the biggest challenge.
Thanks, Kristen. That was the last question that we had. Do you have any closing thoughts for today?
I don't. I do enjoy our time together. I hope that you'll share this information with your colleagues and ask them to join in as well. Look at our archives on our YouTube channel and join us next week where we're going to be talking even more specifically about some prevention tactics. Thanks so much for joining us.